Hello, my name is Carly, and I would like to thank you for joining the Member Service Center and commemorating Independence Day. Let us begin by saying the Pledge of Allegiance. May everyone stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Now, I'm sure a lot of us are going to be out in the sun having some fun with that good old Kansas City barbecue in a couple of days, but it's important to remember that it didn't start with fireworks and freedom. It started with injustice and gunpowder. There was a great deal leading up to the American Revolution, even before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. You may recall from history class the catalyst to our secession from the British Empire being the French and Indian War, also called the 7 Years' War, which ended in 1763. Although it was short and yielded many victories for Britain at the time, it instigated further tension between the French and British and caused conflict in the colonies. In an effort to pay the debts incurred by the conclusion of the French and Indian War, the British Parliament moved quickly in enacting a series of laws over the course of about a decade intended to generate revenue for the British government. This began with the Sugar Act, a tariff enacted in 1764 to deter colonists from purchasing molasses and rum from the French and the Dutch West Indies. Within the year, the British government passed the Currency Act, effectively nullifying any local or colonial currency in use. In 1765, tensions escalated further with the passing of the Quartering Act, requiring colonists to house British troops, and the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was the first direct tax against the colonies and taxed nearly all paper goods, prompting boycotts on British goods, a tax on some tax collectors' homes, and protests in the colonies. The British Parliament rescinded this act in 1766 as a result of the unrest, but they declared in an additional act they would not surrender control over the colonies. The Declaratory Act, passed the same day as the Stamp Act was repealed, stated that they could make laws binding the American colonies in all cases whatsoever. This was quite a bold statement coming from a government an entire ocean away. Despite the fact the colonies had been part of the British Empire for over a century, the King and Parliament only started issuing taxes and tariffs about 2.5 years prior to this point. In addition, Parliament didn't have anyone representing them in Congress. The lack of representation was an issue for a lot of colonists. The very next year, in 1767, the Townshend Acts were passed. The enactment of this unpopular tax law affected a great deal of colonial life, as it taxed tea, lead, glass, paper, again, and paint. This was especially egregious to the colonists, prompting further boycotts and circulating literature detailing the unjust nature of these persisting taxes imposed by the British government in the absence of colonial representation. It took a bit longer for the British to listen this time, but in March of 1770, after continued protests and boycotts, Parliament rescinded all but one of the taxes involved in the Townshend Acts, and that was the tax on tea. In 1773, Parliament enacted a new tariff that strengthened the taxes against tea during the Townshend Act, and also simultaneously giving the British East India Company a monopoly on tea in the colonies. The resulting Boston Tea Party, where colonists disguised as Native Americans dumped an entire shipment of tea into the Boston harbor, was a bold statement against the British government and its tyranny. In retaliation, the British government enacted the Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts, which further restricted colonial autonomy and closed Boston Harbor. This galvanized the colonies to unite and resist against King George III and British Parliament. In September of 1774, the First Continental Congress met to discuss how to proceed as a united front with representatives from all of the colonies but Georgia. They agreed to continue boycotting British goods and began to form militias, preparing for the possibility of war. On April 19, 1775, the shot around the world rang out in Lexington and Concord. British troops sent to confiscate colonial arms were met with colonial militiamen. The events that followed marked the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. This was the beginning of a treacherous and tumultuous war, but not the end of our struggles with the British Parliament and King George III. In July, just shy of a year before the Declaration of Independence was formally adopted, the newly formed Second Continental Congress issued the Olive Branch Petition in the hopes of preventing a formal war declaration. By September, however, the king had declared his own proclamation of rebellion, effectively burning any proverbial olive branches. The Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, after about a month of drafting and discussion. With this declaration, our country's founding fathers severed the colony's ties to the British Crown, and the War for Independence truly began. This was not the last time we fought for our rights as a country, but this was the first time we fought as a country and as Americans. So while we all chow down on that good Kansas City barbecue and eat a popsicle, let us not forget the injustices experienced by our founding fathers, but let us celebrate our constitutional, unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.